Thank you, Mike, for those kind comments. I want to first ask, is there anyone here who has not been introduced yet? So, if you haven't, I'd say welcome. So, good to have everybody here. Always a pleasure to come to the Tulsa Chamber and talk about where we've been, where we're going, because I know we're all in this together, right? Right. We think we're all talk about the objective of what we want for our area, for Tulsa, for our communities surrounding. I'm from Sapulpa, other side of the river, but I think we're all, looking to make sure we all have a better quality of life, make sure that we've got an environment in Oklahoma that's the best it can be, good place to live. We want our children the opportunity to come back here, if they so choose, live in a great state of Oklahoma. It's been my pleasure to be serving as the pro tem for going on my fourth year now, and I think I've been extremely fortunate, got a good group to work with. I think we all are on the same page when we talk about what we want for Oklahoma, and that's jobs, jobs, and jobs. And the only way we get there is make sure we all work together, and I appreciate all the work of the Tulsa Chamber and the One Voice agenda. You all are very good, very diligent about how you all come down to the Capitol and remind us on a very weekly or bi-weekly basis about what promises have been made and what agenda for the Tulsa area is for the year, and that's really instrumental as we get together to put together our agenda for the state this year. And it's very timely because tomorrow Senate Republicans will be meeting in Oklahoma City. We'll have a one-day working session working on our agenda for next year, so it's very timely that we have the opportunity to look at the One Voice agenda for Tulsa, and that helps us as we put together our own agenda. What I'd like to do, first of all, is just talk about some of the pro-growth policies that we've enacted over the last couple of years and kind of where we stand on that. And if you all have any questions, I think you all have got my Twitter address that you all can address those. And those are TW Shannon at, what is it, Twitter or something? So I'm not high tech. I don't have a Twitter account. I'm still old-fashioned. I've got one of these things called BlackBerry. So I think there's a few of them left. So I've got a lot of catching up to do on the tech. So, this past summer we had to meet in special session. The legislature had to deal with some lawsuit reform bill that was passed in 2009. And it was very important, of course, to the business community in Oklahoma and to the medical profession. That was a bipartisan piece of legislation. It was signed by Governor Henry at the time. And that thing was challenged in our court. And the courts decided that, you talk about log rolling and more than the one subject rule. And I always have used the analogy talking about cookies that, lawsuit reform, we're talking about a cookie, but the court decided that, well, you're talking about chocolate chip cookies, and you're talking about, different types of cookies, whatever your peanut butter, whatever your favorite one is. But again, we're all talking about cookies. But anyway, the court saw it differently and said, no, you all need to go back and divide those up. We ended up going into special session and passed 23 bills. Took a minimum of 5 days, and we did that. And applaud the Speaker and the Governor. We were all on point and working together to get that done. There was a cost factor involved to go back into special session. And again, if we thought it was unnecessary, but again, we want to abide by the courts, and we did that, so we took care of that, and that special legislation is back on the books, and I think that's very important to the economic development of Oklahoma as we move forward. And talking about other important issues that we did, I know Mike mentioned workers' comp reform. That was something that ever since I first came into the legislature, I think in 2004 when I came into the State House, one of the significant reforms that we did in 2005 was workers' comp reform. And at the end of the session, it was signed by the governor, and we thought, wow, we've got a great piece of legislation here. And again, it was thrown out by the courts. 2011, again, we had workers' comp reform signed by the governor, and again, it was some very good legislation, but again, we didn't think we had gone far enough, so last year we went all out and went to an administrative system, and that piece of legislation, again, a lawsuit has been filed, and I think the first hearing on that will be November 14th. So we'll be watching a watchful eye over that and see how that comes out. But again, something that Oklahoma for years has always been at the top of the list about the workers' comp rates in Oklahoma. I was reading an article the other day, actually a piece of a newsletter that was written by a fellow in Enid in 1947, and he was writing to his friends about Oklahoma and how high the cost of workers' comp costs are. They're like the highest in the country. That was 1947. So this is an ongoing problem that's been going on for many, many years, but already we're seeing the benefits of this new legislation. NCCI is already, before the legislation is even enacted, that the rates for workers' comp costs next year are coming down by 15%. So we think that's a very good positive sign for Oklahoma and Oklahoma businesses, and it's also good for Oklahoma workers that under this new program, the benefits, trying to get people back to work as soon as possible, and that'll be good for everybody. The transportation, certainly a big commitment on the state, part of the legislature, and 8-year plan has been, we look at that every year, and we're fully endorsed on that. And I know a lot of you are probably tired of seeing a lot of those orange cones run around Tulsa, but we're seeing a lot of great improvements, and I know Congressman Sullivan was very important and was a player in that, making sure the IDL, the Skelly bypass, and a lot of the infrastructure around the Tulsa area ongoing. But state bridges has always been on the list, and we've made great inroads over the last several years to address a lot of those infrastructure problems. Commitment that your state dollars are going in the right places, and hopefully we'll be, over the next 8 years, we'll be off that list of on the state bridges. We understand the county bridges are certainly still a problem in the rural areas, and we're certainly committed to working with the counties and looking for ways that we can continue catching up on our infrastructure needs. I think last year, very important to the Tulsa area is the OSU hospital, and we worked OSU worked closely in the Tulsa area, worked closely with the legislature to come up with a plan, and we realized the commitment moving forward and how important the OSU, the teaching hospital, is to the host state of Oklahoma. And certainly the goal is to rural doctors, the necessary, trying to recruit people and keep them in Oklahoma and getting doctors into rural Oklahoma. So we are making progress there, and we understand as we move forward that we will be committed to that. If you read recently on the state budget, I'll just touch briefly on that. We've had our revenue picture over the last several years has been very positive and improving. What we went through in 2009, it's been a long recovery period, but I think over the last several years our revenue picture has been very good. However, the financial report over the last, for the first quarter of this fiscal year shows that Oklahoma revenues in our general fund are 8% under what the projected revenues were. So that is a concern at this point. As a state, Oklahoma, we only appropriate 95% of what the estimated revenue picture is, so we do have that 5% cushion. But again, the first quarter is 8% below budget, but we hopefully part of that was due to the ongoing Washington, D.C. Revenue picture and the lack of dealing with the debt ceiling and budget woes going on up there causes businesses and individuals to be a little reluctant about spending money. But now that that has temporarily been resolved, we hope to see our revenues pick up and catch up, where hopefully by the end of the year we're much more in line with being under that 5%. Education, I think last year we were dedicated to make sure we're seeing more revenues going to our Common Ed, and about $94 million in new money went to Common Ed last year. We know there's still a lot of needs out there in education. We've been a strong proponent over the last couple of years talking about reforms, and I know we're all, engaged right now. You're seeing a lot of information over the last day about the A through F that have come out on your schools and your community, and we're committed on the state level and the legislature to, I think everyone, I've talked to my superintendents and school board members, I think everybody agrees that we all agree on the policy of the A through F. We want to make sure that how it's being implemented is according to statute, and making sure, as we move forward, that we're giving a fair representation to schools on the grades that they have. So I think there's still some tweaks that need to be made in that, and my thoughts on this would be that we need to continue a dialogue with all stakeholders and make sure that what we're doing, we all agree with the policy that we need the grade system, but let's make sure that we're all getting all the right information and making sure that the grades that these schools have are what they truly are. And I think that's the main purpose, because there are some schools out there that are in need, and we want to be there to try to put resources in the classroom. We know there are schools out there that desperately need that, so we are committed to that. We know that it takes dollars. So even though our revenue picture is, not where we want it to be, we know that, we're still committed to make sure we're getting more of our revenues into the classroom to help our good teachers out. So, some of our unfinished business, I know the speaker wants to talk on this also, but I think we're all in agreement that one of the red herrings out there left in Oklahoma that we need to deal with is our pension system. And we've made some pretty good progress over the last several years. At one point, our pension liability reached about $16 billion, and we made some simple fixes in the legislature dealing with your cost of living adjustments on a yearly basis. And we ran some new legislation saying that any COLAs had to be paid for, had to have a funding mechanism before they would go into effect. And that legislation brought the deficit from our liability from $16 billion down to $10 or $11 billion. So that was pretty easy move on our part to address that. And now for the hard part is how do we deal with $11 billion on our liability? And so there have been some ongoing interim studies. The governor's very active. Certainly the speaker and his staff have been very active on this, and state treasurer's been very involved in it. So we understand it's very important. I think this session you'll see, we're already working on it, but you'll probably see some legislation dealing with the pension liability and what we can do to make sure that we're putting enough money into that system, and at the same time honoring the benefits that we've promised to our teachers, to our state workers, to our firefighters, and to our police officers. And we're not wanting to do anything to take anything away from any commitments that were made, but we're really looking at for all the new hires that we make in this state, for new teachers, changing the system, much like most of you in the private sector have done with your own businesses. So we'll be committed to do that, and understand that's a process that we go through in the legislature. So certainly look forward dealing with that. Judicial reform, I think the speaker, I'm going to let him speak to that. That's kind of been interesting in this climate in Oklahoma, but I know you all want the opportunity also to ask us some questions, and look forward to that. But again, everything that we do in the legislature, we certainly appreciate your help, your assistance, and come down and visit us often, and our doors are open, and we're always willing to discuss issues of importance. So thank you for the time.
Good job.
Thank you, Mr. President and Mr. Speaker. Being from Lawton Fort Sill, before I introduce you, and I know you know the importance of the military and defense industry in our state of Oklahoma, I want to thank you and Mr. President for all that you all do to work with our communities and our state and congressional delegation to work to protect and enhance all of the military and defense industry and the military bases in our state, making us the only state in the nation that still has not had a base closed in any of the base realignment and closure positions. And with sequestration on the federal level and the budgets where they're at, we know that that's going to be very important going forward. And it's around $10 billion annual economic impact. And I know you have very significant installation in your community, as we do with National Guard and Reserve here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So we appreciate what you all do in that area. Next, Speaker T.W. Shannon is a native of Lawton, Oklahoma, and an enrolled member of the Chickasaw Nation. Was first elected to the Oklahoma House of Representatives in 2006. Shannon holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Communications from Cameron University and a Juris Doctorate from Oklahoma City University Law School. He worked as a field representative for former Congressman J.C. Watts and for Congressman Tom Cole before serving as Chief Administrative Officer for the Chickasaw Nation Enterprises. Today, he operates a home-based public relations business. He quickly rose to leadership in the State House, where he served as Deputy Majority Whip in his first term, chaired the powerful Transportation Committee in only his second term, and was elected Speaker designate in his third term. In a historic ceremony on January 8, 2013, Shannon took the oath of office to be Oklahoma's Speaker of the House. Speaker Shannon hopes his mark is made by his quest to restore strong families and to inspire the challenge of prosperity through personal responsibility. Shannon is a champion of the state's natural gas industry and recently made a mark by pushing to liquidate excess state-owned property. Shannon also crafted an 8-year plan to rebuild Oklahoma's structurally deficient bridges. GOPAC and organizations whose mission it is to support up-and-coming Republican leaders recently added this proud Oklahoman to its National Advisory Board. Shannon serves as a youth Sunday school teacher at Bethlehem Baptist Church in Lawton. He has been married to his college sweetheart, Devin, for 11 years, and they have 2 children, Audrey Grace and T.W. II. Ladies and gentlemen, our Speaker of the House, T.W. Shannon.
Thank you, Mike, for that kind introduction. It's always, humbling when somebody reads it exactly right. So thank you so much. No, it's such an honor, and thank you to Pro Tem Bingman. I tell you, it's such an honor to get to work with Brian Bingman. I've gotten to know him a lot better personally. And he's an amazing guy who you can always take his word to the bank. When he tells you something, you can believe it. And that's not to be said for every state senator. So no, I'm joking, Senator Brinkley. There is a difference between House members and senators, though. I'll take one more shot at the Senate while I've got the mic after him. There is a saying that there are, you look at the House members. I know we've got some great House members here. Floor Leader Pam Peterson, Majority Leader Fred Jordan, Chairwoman Scott McNeil is here, Representative David Derby, others. And there are about 101 members, and any one of those guys or ladies could or might be governor one day. The difference between us and the Senate is that in the Senate, there are 48 men and women who know they'll be governor one day. And so that's the biggest difference between a House member and a senator. In all sincerity, as Senator Bingman was reading and speaking about kind of the upcoming legislative session, I was quickly marking things off my list, and I'm happy to know that we're going to be in agreement on about 95% of what the agenda will be next session, because we went over it pretty historically. I will say this also, when you think about where we were last session, when we came together as a team with the leadership of Governor Fallin to draft an agenda, to draft a budget in record time, to pass, workers' compensation reform, to pass a moderate tax reduction plan that will be phased in over 3 years, to address our state infrastructures, to increase public education by $91 million in Common Ed, $45 million when you factor everything in we did for higher education. Those were things that people said could not be done, but we were able to do it because you all sent the right people to the Capitol. I will tell you that the Tulsa delegation, certainly in the House I can speak to, is one of the most impressive teams that we have in the legislature. I mean, the people that you send, they're thoughtful about what's right for Oklahoma. They're not total ideologues, totally focused on ideology. They're pragmatists who want to get things done for the state, and they're diverse. They're opinionated and they're strong, and we were able to be successful because of them. And so I just asked them to stand, if you don't mind, take a little personal liberty, and ask the House members from the Tulsa area to please stand and be recognized. I will be running for Speaker again, and I just wanted them to know that. So when we look at next session, at the top priorities, I think Senator Bingman actually did a great job of outlining them. I think the first one that I think will be addressed, certainly at the top of the list, is pension reform. You know, if you can't pick up the paper any day of the week and you see cities, you see countries going bankrupt every single day, and when you nail it down, what's the real issue facing them? It's really the neglect that they've done in their pension reform, whether you're talking about Greece or a number of cities across the nation like Detroit, or if you're talking about cities in California, it's the neglect that they've done on their pension reform. And experts tell us that Oklahoma's about 8 years out from reaching critical mass. And I think it's prudent that we don't wait 8 years to address it, and I'm confident next session that we will. The good news is we have a lot of people weighing in on the subject. The House and the Senate has actually, as Pro Tem Bingman mentioned, we've done a very good job, I think, of starting to address the problem, you know, taking the pension liability, unfunded liability from $16 billion to $11 billion, but I think that's just a start, and we will see us move into, I think, some pretty significant reforms this year. I'm confident. There's a reason that you all in your private businesses got out of the defined benefit plans back in the 70s and 80s, is because they're unsustainable. And they're unsustainable for state government as well, and it's time that we got out as well. And so we will be looking at that, I think, from a holistic viewpoint. I don't know how much we can get done in one session, but I think that it's only a matter of time before we start making our state pension plans look more like those that are reflective in the private sector. And we have a lot of help with that. I know that the treasurer has weighed in, as well as the state auditor, and I think the governor will also be weighing in with the plan. And so we'll come together, I'm confident, and come up with a solution that puts Oklahoma, working Oklahomans first. Also, I believe, you know, next session we'll be dealing a lot with looking at, you know, healthcare. Healthcare is obviously a major issue and concern. Governor Fallon, I think, was wise in rejecting the idea of setting up a state exchange or expanding Medicaid when she did. You know, we are looking at many states around the country who are having a lot of buyer's regret for those that have. They're finding out it's already unsustainable. Right now, 1 in 4 Oklahomans is already on Medicaid, and I don't know that making it 1 in 3 will be affordable for the state. But having said that, we have to come up with a solution that addresses the needs of our hospitals, who frankly bear an undue burden when it relates to the current policy and the way that we fund health care in the state of Oklahoma, and I'm hopeful we can do that. One of the first steps to doing that was looking at our Insure Oklahoma plan. Last session, there was a lot of pressure put on legislators to somehow craft Insure Oklahoma to look more like Obamacare. And we stood up in the legislature and said, no, we're not going to do it. We stood up to the federal government. And as a result of that standing up, the federal government caved. They blinked for just a moment, and they decided to grant us a 1-year extension on Insure Oklahoma. And we were able to keep it intact as it is for another year, but we'll hopefully be able to come up with a solution that is affordable and sustainable long-term for working Oklahomans. We'll also next session, I think, spend a lot of time looking at judicial reform. This has been an area that's been near and dear to my heart. You know, we've passed significant legislation in Oklahoma time and time again, only to see it being struck down by the Supreme Court. And I don't care what end of the spectrum you are ideology-wise, but I think you can agree that having a Supreme Court that gives at least a predictable outcome, what that outcome would be based on court precedent, and not setting court new precedent every single time they rule, I think that's important. I think the reason we've seen that happen is because we've gotten out of balance with the balance of power among the 3 branches of government. And I think we did it to ourselves. We enacted term limits on the legislature. We have term limits for all state 10-wide elected offices. We have none at all for our judicial system. And so we had an interim study last week, and we looked at some possible solutions. Some ideas came out about having Supreme Court justices run for office. They already have a retention ballot. I don't know that that's the right direction, but certainly I think a way that, offers a little bit more in balance, in terms of balance among the three branches of government, I think is critically important. Another major issue that I think we're going to address next session is looking holistically at what we do for mental health. That is a issue that has gone, frankly, neglected. We were successful last year of increasing spending in that area of about $17 million. A lot of that was due, I'll give full credit to Governor Fallon, who did a great job of championing that issue. I think we will continue next session to wrestle with that again. The other issue that, and I'll end there, will be education reform. We've talked a lot for years about what do we do about our schools. As Pro Tem Bingman mentioned, the A through F implementation has not gone as we directed it to go in the legislature. I think there's been a lot of uncertainty in the marketplace about it, but make no doubt about it, having a predictable way to evaluate how good our schools are doing, that's prudent and that's smart and that's a good economic stimulus for us, but it has to be a system that's fair and is understandable by not just those that are administering the system, but to those that are constituents, the parents and students. And I don't know that we've achieved that yet, but I'm confident that we will. But at the end of the day, and I've talked a lot about this with one of your famous Tulsans, George Kaiser, about what does it take to turn things around in public education. And it's not about socioeconomic issues. It's not about race and gender. Those things are very small. What it takes is having a qualified, highly motivated, highly trained teacher in the classroom. That's what is required. And in order to do that, we have to, and yes, we have to pay them like professionals. That's first and foremost. But in order to do that, we must move away from this antiquated system of paying teachers solely based upon years of experience. People don't do that in the private sector unless they're totally union dominated. And we've got to move out of that in public education. And I'm hopeful we can find a solution to doing that so that we can reward our best teachers and encourage people to go into the teaching field. So I will cut it off there and say thank you for the opportunity to serve as the Speaker of the House. It is certainly the thrill of a lifetime to get to do it, and I'm very confident with the great team that we have that we're doing that we are making a difference and doing the right things in Oklahoma. When you compare us to what's happening to other states around the country, it's not by hop and circumstance. It's because we work in tandem with our chamber groups to make sure that we're creating a business environment that encourages growth, that encourages investment in Oklahoma. And it's because of the difference that you make every day by being here. You could certainly be doing something else, I know, but the fact that you care enough about your state to invest in your chamber and to set the one voice agenda, it's important. I got to give kudos to Mike Neal, who does a great job. He's a great advocate, as are your other chamber directors, and Mike is one of the most effective. And when he's at the Capitol and he's sober, he is fantastic. And I will tell you, that is most of the time. So thank you so much.
Well, Speaker Shannon, it's tough to follow a comment like that. You threw me all off, but I'll have to get gathered here. I'm Steve Tiger, Superintendent CEO of Tulsa Tech, and it's my pleasure to lead this question and answer session. I want to thank Mr. Neal and his staff with the Chamber and Board of Directors. What great partners we have. It's an extremely effective Tulsa Regional Chamber and all the other chambers represented in the crowd today. I see a lot of partners that we work with at Tulsa Tech, so glad to be part of this event. I will just jump right into the questions. I would like to say Speaker Shannon mentioned earlier in a private meeting that with 101 House representatives, you usually get 150 ideas on one particular issue, and I think I could say that with my staff at Tulsa Tech. We definitely have a lot of opinions, and I believe the intent, integrity is the most important thing, and these two gentlemen, Pro Tem Bingman and Speaker Shannon, definitely display that. So thank you for what you do for Oklahoma. We're honored that you're in the positions you're part of. With that, a few questions, and I think you've hit on a lot of these, but maybe some follow-up opportunities, and please feel free to both jump in or decide who's going to tackle these You've talked quite a bit about education, and we know in Oklahoma there's three core systems: higher education, common education, and career tech. So what are some of your additional ideas regarding funding going into this session, and specifically about recruiting and retaining, the ability to recruit and retain strong teachers as we move forward?
I'll just kind of piggyback on what I've already said about, I think we've got to move into a system that is based upon merit. This idea that we pay people the same amount of money regardless of the job they do, that's just not the way business is done. And for whatever reason, we've allowed that to happen, that system to evolve and to be cemented in our education system. And I think it's the biggest drag that we have right now. I will say there's another kind of bigger issue as it relates to education. It's so easy to measure how student performance is and how things are going in education because you got them there and you can test them. But the real challenge that we have in our public education system, I don't care, we could take the entire GDP of the United States and throw it in, and that is not a replacement for a committed mother and a committed father. And a breakdown in the family unit is the real challenge that I think we're facing in our public education system. We're just seeing the results of that in public education. Having said that, we also have to be cognizant that in the 21st century, a committed mother and a committed father is not the reality for every kid in our system. And so while certainly I think pay is part of it, raising accountability is certainly a part of it, and I think embracing the ideas of local control. This idea that we can, somehow control what happens in our every single school at 23rd and Lincoln, I think that's an old model that's broken, and we have got to reinstate and also embrace the ideas about local control if we're going to fully empower parents, teachers to be involved in the lives of the students as they wish. So I think that's the biggest part that we can do.
Thank you, Speaker. Pro Tem Bingman, if you could please discuss the issue of the skills gap. There's a lot of conversation throughout the nation, especially in Oklahoma, and I'm partial to this question being involved with career technical training, but a lot of employers continue to tell us there's a major skills gap issue with individuals having the skills that are needed for workforce. We know how important that is for our economy to grow. So if you could please discuss your thoughts on the skills gap.
Well, first of all, we do recognize that, and we're very want to work with career tech and making sure that, and also in higher ed, that make sure that we're identifying companies, working with the business community, and making sure that we're identifying the students that are coming out, graduating from school, whether it's a 2-year or career tech program or the 4-year, but making sure that we're concentrating on the needs of the businesses, that make sure that the workforce that they expect, whether it's a new business or we're out recruiting a business, they want to make sure, one of the questions I always hear is make sure that the workforce that we have in Oklahoma can supply the needs that that company needs. So we have to make sure that what's being offered in our education system is working with the business community and making sure that what we're courses that we're offering and the degrees that they receive are meeting the needs in the business community. So I'm trying to tie those two together.
Great. You're doing a great job with that, by the way. Thank you. This is a little bit regarding revenues and taxes. As we have all heard, state revenues are not meeting projections. What steps, if any, will need to be taken, and how will the legislator work to ensure core services are protected?
We'll raise your taxes. Oh, I didn't say that.
Tweet. I hear tweets going out right now.
Well, I think one of the challenges is that we've seen, we all know it. There's no economist in the world that would disagree that when you lower taxes, you see a stimulus in your state economy. And one of the challenges that we have is the tax cut that we passed, we delayed it a year, and I'm confident if we hadn't done that, we would actually see an increase in revenue. But be that as it may, we were able to do some pretty remarkable things last session because we had a strong economy. And so where our focus must be in this legislative session is what can we do to keep Oklahoma's economy strong, to make sure that this is a great place to grow a business, to start a business and to encourage people to invest in that business. When we allow people to keep more of their money, they do one of two things with it. They either save it and invest it, or they spend it. Both are good for the economy. And so, having said that, we must also recognize that it is a holistic picture. And so I think the question, the B part of the question about a commitment to core government service, we've done that. I think we've got a proven track record that we want to do. We want to invest the public dollars in education, because when you invest in education, you will see a return on that investment. And so I think one of the best things that we can do is make sure that we're holding our schools accountable, but also making sure that they have the resources they need to educate our students.
Thank you, Speaker Shannon. Last question of the day. With municipalities so heavily dependent on volatile sales tax, what can be done to diversify municipal revenue?
That's a very good question. Having been former mayor, city councilor, you put up a new box and someplace, and boy, you're just shifting that sales tax dollars, and communities start scrambling for the same dollar, because people they're going to buy the same thing, but depending on where they buy it, of course, you're affecting one community over another, and it is a big challenge. And the only other way that cities can make that up is through their fees and services. And a lot of times you see your utility bills, your water bill, and how high that is. And we're not even talking about paying for water yet. So, that's down the road of the true cost of dealing with treating water. But what we're seeing on your utility bill right now is actually, in many situations, going to pay for your infrastructure, your needs, in these communities, paying for your personnel and things, because they do have limited sales tax dollars. I don't think, looking at ad valorem, that issue comes up every now and then, is allowing cities to access ad valorem for their operations in addition to their debt service. But, let's face it, Oklahoma is still a rural state, and there's, adamant no way is that going to happen, I'm sure, in the state legislature. So it's a tough situation, and also we're dealing with the internet sales, and that really hurts your mom and pop shops, in your small communities. So another issue that's really a federal issue, but and that's hurting the sales tax revenues in local communities. Don't have a really good answer, and I recognize the problem, though, that it is.
It starts with that. So thank you. It's my pleasure, Tulsa Tech's pleasure, to be part of today's event, and I'd like to thank both you gentlemen for the service commitment to our state. Thank you.